Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eric Byrant. I'm a senior software engineer at BioRaft. Welcome to Drupal Nights, sponsored by BioRaft. Tonight we are very, very fortunate to have Drew Trafton here to speak about awesome theming techniques using modern JavaScript and building really responsive theming. Drew claims that he reads textbooks and documentation for fun. Be that as it may be. He comes to us from Bowst Digital in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. We're very glad to have him, so welcome.
Thank you guys very much. Thank you, BioRaft, for hosting us tonight. Very good. The food was delicious. Highly recommend the lamp. I guess you guys did it, but anyway, like you said, my name is Drew Trafton. I'm a developer at Bowst Digital up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and here tonight to talk about precision theming. So we do a lot with kind of modern JavaScript technologies up at Bowst, and we've sort of integrated our Drupal developers and our JavaScript developers to make this wonderful, gooey, delicious chocolate chip cookie of awesome themes. So what we're going to talk about tonight, theming the JavaScript Renaissance. So if you have been following the JavaScript community at all, there's been a lot of stuff happening, and it's happening very rapidly. Some things are great for Drupal and other content management systems. Some things are not. But there's definitely a lot of potential opportunities to kind of leverage those technologies and make our Drupal sites better. One of those technologies specifically I'm going to talk about tonight that we found to be really helpful on our sites is code splitting and Drupal precision asset loading, patent pending. That's just a term we came up with. I don't know if it's like a technical thing, but basically the idea of loading only the JavaScript you need on certain pages. And then we're going to talk about why Drupal and ReactJS are such good bromigos. So, the JavaScript Renaissance. So it's springtime for JavaScript and web apps. So I just want to go a brief history of JavaScript here for those not in the know and to kind of put everything in context. So back in the early 90s, they needed a way to handle simple stuff on static HTML pages. So they came up with this JavaScript thing. They used it for alerts, form validation, and really simple animations. Next came Jquery and Dom Manipulations. So you had simple interactive components. This is the Jquery accordion here. Pretty basic stuff, but did a lot to make pages a little bit more interactive, feel a little bit more like a conversation between the user and the page. And that gradually evolved into the first framework. So we see single page apps, Ajax. You see the Gmail logo here. So Gmail is actually one of the first sort of single page JavaScript applications that used pulled data in asynchronously and displayed it using all the rendering was done via JavaScript. And now, in the present day, we have just an insane amount of JavaScript pretty much everywhere. There's NodeJS on the server. You can do Cordova and PhoneGap to run it on mobile phones and other platforms. It's everywhere, and it's become sort of a de facto starting language for a lot of web developers. And I think because the number of people involved, there's just a lot of really creative and innovative things happening. So JavaScript is evolving. It is no longer alerts and form validation from the early 90s. It is all of these insanely awesome, really cool technologies. Node.js, React, Gulp, Webpack, these are all things that have come out in really the last half decade, 4 or 5 years. And are already kind of stable platforms being used in production apps across the internet. So our goal today is to be more like Buzz here and be kind of in wonder and excitement about the future, and less like Woody, who looks a little bit overwhelmed. So if JavaScript is everywhere, what is preventing us from making it a better part of our Drupal theme, or sort of incorporating it in a more robust way in our Drupal theme? So what would that even look like? But we think it looks pretty sweet. So this is a project we did for Showcase Cinemas, where you may go to see your movies. And what we did is we divided the theme folder into two basically equal halves. So we have the static folder here, which is all of our static JavaScript, CSS, all that stuff. It basically looks exactly like a front-end application might look. And then we have our traditional templates folder, which is your normal Drupal templates. So we really kind of looked at the site, looked at what they wanted to do, and came up with this sort of hybrid approach. This has a lot of different names. I started calling it nearly headless Drupal. It's also been called progressively decoupled Drupal or just decoupled Drupal. It's a really kind of new idea, and I think there's still a lot of stabilization happening around how it's going to look. But this is sort of our initial approach and our first take at it. So our Suite Templates folder should look pretty familiar. We've got, we just divided up templates files by type, and then you've got these really, really long names per the Drupal 7 naming convention. That should all look pretty familiar. What might look less familiar is our static folder. And the way this works is we incorporated a front-end build system using Gulp, which is a task runner. Basically, it's kind of like Run, slightly different, but same idea. And sort of, really wanted to create the look and feel and sense for a developer of building a front-end application. And so we have a Gulp file here. You're writing all of your styles in Sass, which is really nice. Our front-end people love that. And then you have a scripts folder with all the JavaScript, and it bundles all the JavaScript in, and we'll look at that a little bit later. But basically you have a source folder, so this is where you're writing all of your code. A packages folder, so for those of you who haven't used a Node Package Manager, it's a great tool. There's a gazillion JavaScript libraries out there, and this makes it really easy to manage them. They're all stored in this package.json file. It's pretty standard package manager if you use Composer or like Python. I forget what the library manager in Python is, but same idea. All your dependencies are stored in a file. You can run one command and it pulls down all of your dependencies and chucks them in this Node modules folder. So really handy way to utilize those JavaScript modules. So what are the benefits of kind of bringing in these JavaScript technologies into your Drupal theme? One of the things that I love is a better folder structure. So you get faster development, it's easier to maintain, it makes more logical sense. I call this YOLS. I couldn't quite make it YOLO, but YOLS, which is you obviously love less in Sass. So if you had the chance to write your styles with less and or Sass, it's really, really hard to go back to PHP or to CSS. And it's so much easier to kind of keep everything modular and maintain everything. One of the problems we often have is we're building sites for older browsers. So a lot of our Drupal sites are very public facing. You want them to work on everything from IE8 up to the most modern version of Chrome. And there are so many amazing JavaScript tools for doing that. And by kind of developing this build system, you can take advantage of those. We really love Auto Prefixer, which will take, say you're using Flexbox, for example, which you probably wouldn't if you're building an IE site, but it will automatically add all the lines for the different browser compatibility. So to like -moz, -display, -flexbox, or whatever. You can also use compatible JavaScript minification. So you can use Uglify.js, which is a library that lets you minify your JavaScript, and you can pass it a parameter that says, this needs to be IE8 compatible, or this needs to be, God forbid, IE7 compatible. It's really handy for that. Finely tuned precise control of the asset build pipeline. So as a lot of you probably know, you can check a box in Drupal that says minify and aggregate your CSS and JavaScript files, which is great for performance, but it's really frustrating when you're making changes and then you're like, why are these changes showing up? And then you realize that you forgot to clear a cache or that the box is still checked. Personally, I just liked having a little bit more control, and I know exactly how that file is being minified and how it's being bundled together. It helps me keep my sanity. One of the big wins for me is breaking out JavaScript files however you want and using require.js, Browserify, or Webpack to kind of aggregate them together into a bundle. If you've ever been debugging a jQuery error and you have no idea where in thousands of lines of code that error is happening, this is for you. I've done that more times than I can count, and this just makes your life so much saner. You can use source mapping. Your files go from tens of thousands of lines of code to maybe a couple hundred at most. It lets you keep a really organized and well-defined folder structure. And then, of course, we all want to work faster, so watch scripts, live reload, hot reloading, let you, when you modify a style, it'll automatically update in the browser, no page refresh needed, nothing like that. Really great for developer workflow. So let's talk a little bit about code splitting and Drupal, which again is Drupal Precision Asset Loading, patent pending. So here's what kind of an out-of-the-box view source might look like on a Drupal site. Now I know it's super small, and I'm going to quiz you later on what all of these files are. But basically the idea is these are all script tags. I mean, this is a ton of script tags. And each one of those is making a new request to your server. It's pinging your server time. All of those JavaScript files have to be loaded and executed. And half of these probably aren't even relevant to this page. It's silly, and it's excessive, and it's not necessary. I mean, what would Obi-Wan say about this? Only Imperial Stormtroopers are so precise. That is to say, not precise at all. No one wants to be an Imperial Stormtrooper. Let's be the hero instead. So like I said, it's a lot more network requests for each page load. So, I mean, your browser is pinging your server again and again and again and again for all these JavaScript files that, frankly, probably aren't necessary for your page. The browser has to execute all of those files. And again, even if the JavaScript is not being used on that page, the browser still has to parse and execute it, which delays your rendering time. So, like you said, basically nothing. It's not used on most pages. And in the end, we're just increasing payload size and slowing down our page rendering. And Lana says, yeah, for those of you who watch Archer. That's like her tagline. Yep. That's what she says. So we're going to be a little bit more precise about things. We're going to use Gulp and Grun, or Browserify. In this case, we use Gulp for this project. And we're going to create page-specific JavaScript files. So we bundle all of our assets together into a single, rather large, but a single file that we can load from the browser. And then we're also going to use the power of Drupal and the preprocessed page function hook to decide which JavaScript bundle to load on a given page, depending on the page type. So let's take a look at what that might look like. So the step one is page-specific bundles, code splitting. So again, this is our static directory over here. And I'm not sure, it's a little bit blurry. I'm not sure how well you guys can see. But basically, what we did is in our scripts folder, we have a folder for globals, a folder for homepage, for the movie detail page, the movie overview page, the showtime. So these are each essentially a page type in Drupal. Not necessarily node, but sort of a page type. And for each of these folders, for each of these page types, we create a separate JavaScript bundle. And there is some code duplicated between those bundles. So, for example, in this project, we use React. So in each one of those bundles, it comes with a bundled version of React. The key is you only load one bundle per page, so there's no actual duplication. And the way we did it is we used Gulp here. I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with Gulp, but basically it lets you define a task just like this, and you can run it from the command line just by typing Gulp scripts, which is this text string here. It runs this function. We set it up so you can pass it an argument called entry, so you can decide which bundle you want to build, which is a lot faster than building all of them. So I found this, like, say I'm working on the home page. Like, why do I need to compile all the other pages every time I make a change? Because one of the cool things about this is we were able to share React components, bits of JavaScript, between the different pages that had that were using the same type of functionality. So, for example, there's a Showtimes button that has just like, it looks really simple. All it is a time and a link, and you can click the link and go and buy the ticket. But there's a lot of logic there about when it displays, if it's disabled or not, depending on the Showtime. So we bundled that into one component and then used it throughout the site. We only had to write that logic one time, which is really great. So anyway, what this does is it iterates over all of these folders, creates a bundle for each folder, and then outputs it into this dist folder here. So that's how we got around it. You could use Webpack to do this as well. So Webpack is a really great bundler, and it lets you do this same type of thing. Gulp is kind of nice because it's just straight up JavaScript. So if you want to do something really sort of custom or interesting, Gulp will let you do that. It gives you a lot more sort of flexibility under the hood. So that's step one. Step two is the precision asset loading. And again, this looked way better on my laptop screen than it does on this screen. But basically, I've kind of pulled out the relevant parts. So this is the preprocessed page function for our theme. And what I did is I cut out some bits above this, but based on this vars argument, I was able to determine what page type we were trying to load. And you can see that these page types here, if you could read it, correspond to those folders. And what I did is for each page type, all I did is bring in the bundle associated with that page. And you can do this in the preprocessed page function, and it dynamically adds that script tag to the page, and no other script tags. Well, other ones, but none of the other bundles script tags. So this looks a lot better. We have way fewer script tags. It makes one kind of big request to the browser or to the server, which ends up in some cases being a lot more performant than making multiple requests, especially if you're hosting on Acquia or Pantheon, or you've got your own caching system, because these are all static assets. It's just a file. Once that can get into cache, it's lightning fast. And again, we are Drupal Jedi, not Imperial Stormtroopers. It's just like Bullseye and Womp Rats in my T16 back home. Be a Drupal Jedi. Use code splitting and Drupal. So now I want to talk a little bit about React. React is a library that's near and dear to my heart. I love it very much, and I think I kind of started with React by itself, and then I realized that it has so much to offer for Drupal and for CMSs in general because of the way it's architectured and because of the way you kind of mount it into the DOM. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why I love React. A lot of people are using Angular 1 and Angular 2 for this type of thing. I think Angular 2 is going to make it a lot easier to integrate with Drupal. Angular 1, I think, is a little bit more designed from the ground up to be sort of a single page type thing. React works really well in a sort of progressively decoupled, nearly headless setting, where you're able to load a lot of content on the page via Drupal, and then you want this one specific area to be really JavaScript intensive. So what we ended up doing for Showcase, for example, is they have a page that shows all of their movies at all of their theaters, and you can filter, you can do all sorts of crazy stuff. You can look into the future, you can change the theater that you're looking at, and we did it all via React, but the header and the footer of the page are still generated by Drupal. So you don't have to futz with making the menu look exactly like the menu before. It's the same exact menu that Drupal generates. And we just kind of, again, precisely load the JavaScript and the React components where we want it. So React has been getting a lot of press lately. I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with it, but I just wanted to go over some basics. I screenshotted this directly from the website, so it's right from the source. React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. So what really makes that compelling for Drupal is, and especially for the theming layer, is that's what we care about. Drupal is going to take care of a lot of the content editing, the business logic, the caching, whatever. What we really care about in the theming layer is the UI and the user experience. And that's why I think React is such a great fit. It doesn't come with all this extra baggage for routing. So for example, Angular has a pretty robust routing solution. You don't really need that in a decoupled Drupal site, at least in a semi-decoupled Drupal site. It's all just excessive stuff. So React really is kind of lets you hone in on what you are concerned about in the theming layer, which is the UI. It's got this concept of the virtual DOM. So this is kind of an insane thing. It's also called the shadow DOM. And basically the way it works is React maintains a representation of the DOM in memory. And then when you run JavaScript code that updates what looks like the DOM, it actually updates that shadow DOM or that virtual DOM. And then React dynamically does a diff against the shadow DOM and the actual DOM and only makes the updates necessary. So, if you've got an H1 tag with a title in it, and you update the text string inside of that title, instead of re-rendering the entire H1, it'll dynamically just change the inner HTML of that H1. And obviously, for that example, pretty trivial, the difference, but when you're talking about, a 300 item list, and you're only changing the items that actually changed instead of re-rendering the entire list, you get a lot of performance benefits. And then data flow, this is a little bit more of a touchy-feely sort of developer-friendly thing. The word that they use is reduces boilerplate and is easier to reason about than traditional data binding, which sounds kind of wishy-washy, but in fact is actually true. So this idea that it has one-way reactive data flow, which means that everything follows a very particular path. And it does actually make things, the way they write it here is actually pretty accurately captures the experience, which is that it's easy to read about or reason about. You can follow a click event from the UI to the business logic layer to the API back to the UI to see the updates. It's easy to kind of follow that chain of events, which makes your UI A, much more predictable, and B, way easier to troubleshoot and to debug, which as a theme run front-end developer is awesome. Love it. But one of the things that it introduces is JavaScript and markup together in the same file. What does that even look like? And I know a lot of people who have had it pounded into their heads that separation of concerns, encapsulation, are going, what? Right now, like, why would you ever do that? Again, wow, this is super blurry. But if you look at the slides later, you'll be able to see it. But basically, what you have up here is your UI-related functions. So, like in jQuery, you'd have a click handler. All your click handlers are right here. And your markup is right below it. And that's one of the reasons why it's easy to reason about. So if let's say this is, I don't even know what that is. Looks like a button. So if you had a button here with a click handler, the function that runs when you click that button is right here. So it's in the same file, it's all encapsulated in the same place. It's really easy to follow what happens and then follow the chain of events from there. And in this case, we're using Browserify, so we have these require, which again is super blurry, but you pull in all of the JavaScript libraries you need in that particular file. So instead of having like a global script tag with jQuery in it, you would, if you wanted to use jQuery in here, you would have require jQuery there. And that way you know that you're only loading the JavaScript that you need to actually execute your code, which is really, really helpful. And it also makes it really easy to include, like for those of you guys who've used underscore, Lodash, Moment.js, all these really great JavaScript libraries, super easy to just pull in your component and use them right away. You've got lifecycle methods, and so when a component, when it mounts, when it dismounts, so kind of when it comes into existence, when it's kind of taken out of the DOM, you can hook in and change things at any point in time, which is really nice. It actually works a lot like Drupal hooks, where at a certain point in sort of the life cycle of the component, you can make changes, update things, etc. And I've found that there's only a few of them, but there's really more than you need. And you can tell all sorts of really, really cool stuff with that. Your event handlers, like I was saying, you've got your click handlers right there, and then this big render function, which is responsible for actually outputting the markup. Obviously, this is not pure JavaScript. You couldn't just send this to a browser and expect it to understand. So you do have to use a compilation engine as part of your build system. That's another reason that Gulp or Webpack or Grunt is really handy. This is called a JSX file, and it's like a syntactic sugar that the React developers came up with to make it easier. Otherwise, you'd be writing these crazy react.create component, and you'd have to pass it all these arguments, and it'd be really non-intuitive for anyone to read. So they came up with this, which is a little bit nicer. React, by the way, was developed by Facebook. They've been using it at Facebook since 2010, maybe even earlier, 2009. So it's a super enterprise ready. They developed it for their website and for their mobile app, and you can really see it in their architecture. So it's very component based. It's a little history of React. Going back to JavaScript and markup on the same page or in the same file. It can't be a good idea. I mean, I came from an MVC background where you had your model, you had your view, and your controller. Your view was just a view. It did nothing else. It was only the display, the presentation. And then you put all of your business logic elsewhere. It seemed such a strange idea to me at first. And then I kind of had this epiphany that on today's web, your presentation is not just how your site looks. it's the interaction as well. It's how the user has a conversation with your site, with that page. And it's kind of got that same ebb and flow. And if you're not using a robust JavaScript library and there's page reloads all the time, it's like watching a TV show with a laugh track taken out. You know, when they pause and there's just awkward silence and then it sort of resumes. That's kind of the same feeling you get. And so if you really want to create like a intuitive, sort of gripping user experience, leveraging a lot of these JavaScript technologies will help you kind of take the presentation out of the PHP twig templating layer and pull it more into like the user DOM front-end experience. Again, like I said, it's also a lot easier to determine a control's behavior, so no more searching through jQuery code. This makes users happy. This makes developers very happy. And there's also been a business layer developed specifically for React. You can use it for other things, but it's called Flux. And it allows you to actually extrapolate some of that business logic into separate classes. And so for your purists out there, you're still technically not putting business logic along with your presentation logic. Your presentation logic is how it looks and how it moves. And the actual data itself is handled by other JavaScript classes, other JavaScript libraries. So again, this is the anatomy of our React component. You can't see it here, but this is a function call to another class, and actually React does a pretty good job of following traditional object-oriented approaches. So we actually pull in an instance of this class. It's a singleton, but a singleton of that class. And that is what's used to manage any business logic you might have. Like I said, you can put all that business logic in Drupal. You can put some of it in React. Totally depends on the use case. We did a little bit of both for this project, depending on kind of how the page was supposed to move and the user was supposed to interact with it. So let's talk about benefits. I mean, React is super cool, but why should we use it for our Drupal project? So this is sort of a recap of what I said. It's just the UI layer. So it's great at managing interactive user views. And you can leave a lot of business logic to Drupal, which is what it does really well. You know, it manages your data, it provides a wonderful content editing experience. Let Drupal do what it does well. Let React handle the user interaction. It's also got component-based development. This is a really powerful tool. So that component that I showed, this is like one file. And you know, say this file represents a contact us form. You could use the same component in every Drupal project you work on. You don't have to rewrite code or anything. It's all just right there. You can reuse it. It's super handy. And again, like I mentioned, we developed components specifically for this project that we're able to reuse across a lot of different pages. So, you know, the Showtimes button, the movie, there's like a grid of movies, and each movie is its own component. And we were able to reuse that across multiple different pages, which made building the site go much quicker and easier. And this is kind of, I should have bolded this or like put massive amounts of underlines underneath it. It's really, really easy to tie into template files. So you might be wondering, like, how do you get this React JavaScript to actually render on the page? Like, how does that bridge happen? And it's really, really straightforward, actually. So all you do is, so here I'm requiring, so I'm pulling in this object, which is my component. In this case, it's called location selector. Then all you do is you grab a DOM node with basic JavaScript, document get element by ID. You could use any selector you wanted or whatever. And then all you do is you say, okay, React, take this location selector, which is this super interactive React component, and you've got this DOM node, this mounting node here. Just stuff that component right in that DOM node, and that's where it lives. One really cool thing I found is that it actually overwrites any content there. So what we ended up doing is inside of that DOM node, we put a little loading spinner, which is great because then the loading spinner displays until React is bootstrapped, generated the markup, and then it just, boom, overwrites that spinner, and your page is there, which provides a nice user experience. So this makes it really easy. I mean, you could tie this into a block ID, you could tie it into a panel, like an item in a view. You could do whatever you wanted. And that's what makes it so great, is it's kind of like the SEAL Team 6 in JavaScript libraries. So you can just like, boom, deploy it where you need it, and then pull it out when you don't want it. I think that's one of the things that makes it much more robust a much better solution for Drupal than, say, Angular, which again is kind of more designed to be, okay, your whole infrastructure is Angular, your whole front end is Angular. Like I said, Angular 2 seems to be a little bit more precise with this kind of thing, but Angular 2 is still not quite as stable as React yet. It's still in active development. Again, easy to understand and predictable behavior, broken out logically into files. So you can build your file system however you want, makes your code super maintainable, easy to understand. Your code files are much shorter, which I like, and just makes me feel like a more sane person. And then the last thing is super high performance. So like I said, they have that kind of concept of the virtual DOM, the actual DOM, and by maintaining a virtual DOM and doing diffs against the actual DOM, it minimizes the amount of DOM upgrades, which for those of you who have worked with JavaScript a lot know that's really the most expensive part in terms of like CPU cycles of JavaScript in the browser. I mean, they can iterate over thousands of records of something in a for loop, no problem. But when it comes to updating the DOM, it still can be really slow, especially on mobile devices where you've got limited CPU. And so React does a really nice job of reducing the CPU load of really, really large DOM updates, which is really handy. So that's kind of the present of Decoupled Drupal. I added these next couple slides today because I was on a call yesterday. It was a webinar hosted by Acquia about this new module they're developing called Progressively Decoupled Blocks. And I just wanted to mention that and talk about it briefly. So this is a rewrite for Drupal 8 of this really, really cool framework that these guys built for weather.com, which for those of you who are not familiar is generally considered the largest Drupal site on the internet. They have an insane infrastructure, and they wanted to use, is this stuck on? They wanted to use some of these interactive components, it actually went with Angular-based components for weather.com. And so they came up with this approach of kind of using blocks to contain bits of Angular components, bits of Angular front-end code. And that was written for Drupal 7. So now they're rebuilding it from scratch for Drupal 8, and it looks really, really interesting. There's a lot of really cool stuff happening around the content authoring experience and the layout authoring experience in Drupal 8. And this is kind of built on top of that. So their goal is to allow custom blocks to be written in ReactJS or Angular 2 by developers who don't really know Drupal. So if you've got a large team, you've got your front-end team and your Drupal team and maybe your database team or whatever, the idea is that your front-end team can build these components out with minimal knowledge of how Drupal works. So in order to do some of the things we had to do for Showcase Cinemas, they're very tightly coupled. So you still kind of had to know how Drupal works, especially the code splitting. You need to know the preprocessed page function. It was very tightly coupled. By kind of creating this module to be the flex point, it allows those teams to work together really well and kind of work independently. And again, it's this idea of progressive decoupling. So I think from this sort of milieu of pulling JavaScript into Drupal, there was this idea for a long time about fully decoupled Drupal. So you'd have a 100% JavaScript app, probably rendered on a completely separate server, pulling in data from Drupal from an API. And I think Dries and a lot of other kind of members of the Drupal community are proposing the idea of maybe not jumping the gun. Drupal has a lot of great things to offer. It's super secure. You get form validation. You get cross-site scripting prevention. You get all this great stuff. Why throw all of that away just to use the latest and greatest shiny new thing? And so the idea is to kind of use the right tool for the right job. So you take that shiny new thing and you put it on your site, but you also include it in part of the larger Drupal architecture, and you still get to reap all of the benefits sort of thereof. So for those of you guys who want to check it out, it's on Drupal.org. The code is not there yet. It's still under active development on GitHub. However, just today, I installed it and got it sort of working. I got a hello world working at least. So it does work. And it's really cool. I highly recommend checking it out. And this is super cutting edge Drupal 8 type stuff. I mean, it's using this page layout module, which is currently a module, but is supposed to be in core sometime soon, and it's going to be, I think, sort of the de facto way to lay out and author pages going forward. Which, hopefully for me, I'm not a big panels fan, so maybe panels will go right. We'll see. So let's wrap it up. there's a ton of JavaScript libraries and tools out there. Reuse them. They will make your life so much easier. And sometimes when you're learning a new thing, there's a little bit of a sort of activation energy, a learning curve. But once you get there, you'll find that your development workflow, your theme is better. You'll just be a much more sane person. I was going to say like me, but I'm not a sane person. So. Drupal, so again, Drupal precision asset loading, gives you the power to dynamically add scripts. So use it, destroy excessive JS load times, be a Drupal Jedi. Don't be a stormtrooper. We all saw the newest Star Wars. We don't want to be stormtroopers. Except maybe for that guy that like fights Finn with the like standard issue weapon.
Traitor.
Traitor! That guy's pretty awesome.
That guy.
You can be him. And again, using the right tool for the right job. So in my experience, I've used Angular, I've used Angular 2, I've used React. React is the best tool for integrating with your Drupal theme. This is my opinion. It's really easy to develop. It kind of fits with the mentality that Drupal offers. And it's really, really easy to kind of isolate on your page, which is really, really helpful because sometimes the Drupal getting the right thing in the right place can be a challenge, especially on the theme editor. And there's some just really incredible stuff happening in the JavaScript community now. It's moving at 1,000 miles an hour. It is hard to keep up, but it will make your life easier. It'll make you feel like you're super modern and cool, which I always try to do. And it'll let you build some really incredible things. That's really what we're all here to do. Is we want to use Drupal, we want to leverage its power and build really, really cool stuff. And I think by kind of embracing the future, embracing JavaScript, and sort of allowing the JavaScript Renaissance to pull us out of the dark ages, we'll be much happier and sane people. So that's me, Drew Trafton, Bowst Digital. It's my D.O username and email. I guess these slides will probably go up somewhere, so you can contact me either way. I'd love to hear from you and chat about anything related to Drupal, but particularly JavaScript-y type stuff. It's sort of my forte. And that's it. Yeah. So. Do you guys have any questions or discussion? Or?
Yeah, so my first question, you touched on it at the end, and that has to do with security. So obviously, you've got cross-site request forgery protection by the format, the FAPI tokens. You've got check plain. You've got all the output filtering, and you've got internationalization that comes from Drupal. How does React provide those things, and or how do you integrate those things that Drupal provides with your front end?
Sure. So, well, luckily we didn't have to do the internationalization on this. For cross-site scripting, so we actually, for this website, ended up not using the Drupal 7 API module, and so we're creating our own. And so we were able to have full control over the output of that API. And so we were able to use all of Drupal's tools in the API for check planing and that sort of thing to sanitize our outgoing stuff. React also has some tools that you can use to sanitize HTML, prevent cross-site scripting, etc. But that is definitely a major concern for utilizing, moving away from Drupal's sort of default template rendering. It's definitely a major concern. And I don't know what the status of the Drupal 8 API is on how they handle that or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I mean, it seems like you have two choices. You either handle it in your template layer, or you just constantly make Ajax requests to get the content that's rendered from Drupal.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of mixed.
Yeah, exactly. And you just also have to be very careful. So for this site, most of what we were loading via Ajax was not user-generated content. And so we weren't as concerned with cross-site scripting, that sort of thing, because we knew we could kind of track the source of the data from start to finish. But yeah, that's something that's a huge part of this, and I think it's a problem that still has not been fully solved with decoupled Drupal implementations. Yeah.
So how does the data getting from Drupal into React, is it converted into like a JSON object or something? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so great question. What we actually ended up doing for this to improve the user experience is we would bootstrap some data onto the page via JSON. So we would basically output a script tag onto the page with a global variable So, if we're going to display a list of movies, we would output, say, the first 20 movies onto the page as JavaScript, so they are immediately available there. And then when the page rendered, it didn't have to make another Ajax call. Those movies were already right there on the page. And then, but because we were using React, because we were using these asynchronous requests, you could then say, okay, show me more movies, and it would make an asynchronous request to a custom API that we wrote that would render the data as JSON and send it back to the browser. Which, say, again, it's really a load off of your server, because that data can be cached aggressively. You're not doing these full page refreshes every time you want to load more data. So that's how we ended up doing it.
You using the browser storage API at all to handle back requests and that sort of thing?
You can. We didn't end up doing that for this site because, again, it was mostly like you were on a page and the page was very interactive. Well, we actually are just about to deploy a site where we did do that. So we have a whole sort of workflow section of the site that's entirely HTML5 routing. It uses the hash history instead of the actual browser history, because with Drupal you can't, I suppose you could reroute it, but we didn't set it up that way to use the actual HTML5 push pod functionality. But it's great. And again, we do the same thing. All the data is communicated back and forth from Drupal via the API, which makes a really, really smooth user experience. And makes it feel very modern, even though you're using Drupal, which is sort of an older internet technology.
Say that too loud.
Yeah, sorry. It's been around for a while. But I'm just saying that it can be improved by leveraging some of these modern technologies. For anyone listening on the internet, I love Drupal. They didn't come out as sound. I should have said super stable, highly secure, and totally incredible platform.
Are they going to rewrite the whole thing in JavaScript?
No. Cool. Any other questions or comments?
Do you have any recommendations for learning more about React?
Yes.
Beginning to learn about it?
Yeah, it is challenging to get into. I had read about it and kind of looked at it and been like, well, this is garbage. I'm never going to learn this. Like, this looks not like nonsense. But then I kept kind of seeing it, so I did do some reading on React's website. I would not recommend that. Their documentation is pretty bad, and they do not, like, they're getting started. You're like, what? Like, what? It doesn't actually help you that much. There are more materials out there now. I can't think of one off the top of my head. I know there are a few tutorials. I think there's a good one online that I saw that was ReactJS without the profanity. That sounds pretty good. I guess my main thing is
Googleable.
Yeah, steer clear of their documentation, because it's good if you want to get into kind of the nuts and bolts of how it works, but in terms of like getting up and running, it's not very accessible.
Thank you.
Basic tutorial was okay, but it was like as soon as I tried to do something different, it just broke.
Yeah, exactly.
And there was nothing to guide me to
Yeah.
how do you do this?
No, it's not, and it's. I mean, I think that's true of any kind of new thing, but React especially because I had learned Angular before that, and Angular's documentation is outstanding. You can just go and find anything, and there's examples of how to do it, and it's great. React is not like that. There's basically there's like 2 examples on the site. That's it. Everything else is just paragraphs and words.
Facebook holds like boot camps every 2 or 3 months in Cambridge, right? Their office. Facebook holds little React boot camps at their office in Cambridge in Kendall Square every 2 or 3 months.
Oh, cool.
Just to get
awesome.
people on board and coding fit and cheap.
Yeah, no, they seem to be pretty excited about it and pushing it pretty hard. I mean, they developed this for internal use, and then we're like, this is great, we got to open source this. And so they open sourced it, and then there's just been this whole explosion. So, I mean, a lot of people talk about React, but really it's sort of this like hub in the center of this constellation of other JavaScript libraries that have sprung up around it. So now there's Flux, there's GraphQL, which is, I think, being implemented in Drupal 8. There's a module, there's some discussion about it, which is really cool. Just Facebook's like really super cool querying language. That's all I really know about it. But anyway, there's a lot happening, and it's happening very quickly, which is exciting and challenging. Again, we want to try to keep our optimism, keep our excitement, be more like Buzz, less like Woody.
You talked a little bit about how you have to build these React scripts, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your development process, how you get from your coding these things up to deployment.
Oh, good question. You mean like building the assets?
Building
for
the
production?
assets, the artifacts. How does that actually get compiled? Do you do like an automated build using Jenkins? Do you then commit those compiled assets to your repo for distribution? How do you end up doing all that?
That's a great question. So we at Bowst host a lot of our sites on Acquia and Pantheon, which right now don't support Node.js. They don't really have the concept of continuous integration built in. So the most stable and secure and reliable way we have now is basically committing the compiled assets. What is nice about those environments is you have a development stage in production. And what we'll do is React actually has two modes. It's got like development mode and then production mode. So development mode makes all these like extra checks. It does way better error handling, etc. For development. And then you have to actually compile it differently for production mode. And usually what we'll do is all the stuff in dev is dev mode, and then I'll merge it with staging, and then I'll do a production build of the same code on staging, and then push that up. And then we just push all of that live when we deploy. I was experimenting around with Circle CI, a couple other CI servers to try and get that build process integrated into our workflow. We're not quite there yet, but we're working on it. And it's definitely something that I think is coming very soon because there's a lot of interest in that the ability to do that.
Have you done anything with like a automated testing of your builds? Like if this is about making interactive components, are there good ways to test that the interaction still works after you make your patches?
Yeah, great question. So I think React doesn't have as robust of a testing framework as Angular. So Angular has a really, really robust testing protocol. They have Karma and all this stuff. And it was really, really designed around test-driven development. Whether it's the culture of Facebook or how React was developed, it doesn't really have that. And because it's kind of manipulates the DOM in such a unique way, it can be really challenging to test. At Bowst, we don't do a ton of TDD, so we haven't played around with it that much. We mostly, when we're testing, we mostly write tests of the API and of the business logic rather than the actual UI, just because it is challenging to test with React. And that's a great question. I wish I knew more about it, but I don't know a ton.
Okay. All right, thank you again.
Thank you very much.